No Vaccine, No Job. I'll hand it over to Shelley-ann and Max. It's your turn.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks very much for getting all the tech side. It's not my forte, the tech. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Knowledge Shop training webinar. We have very privileged to have Max with us today, Max Whitehead, from the Whitehead Group. And I'm sure most of you know who Max is, but for those of you who may not have heard him on the radio or seen him on TV lately, Max is one of New Zealand's leading employment relations practitioners. He's got more than 30 years experience in this field of employment relations, and he's personally advocated over thousands of personal grievance cases and workplace disputes. Max has had roles Ports of Auckland, Auckland Council, District House Board, as well as advocating for hundreds of employers during his 11 years at the EMA, the Employers and Manufacturers Association. So Max is the perfect person to answer all your questions on this new environment we're in with a vaccine or job. Anyway, I'm going to let Max get underway with the questions. I will start from the top. Is there anything you want to add before I get going, Max?
Yeah, this session's not about justifying whether the vaccine is the right way to go or not. It's a huge issue in our society right now, but we don't want to go there. So what I want to do is explain the law and where employers' responsibilities fit. So I think that's what you guys need to hear, and that's the advice that you want to give your clientele.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's hit it from the top. First question we have. What industries can legally apply the rule of no vaccination, no job? How do they enforce the rule? Is it legal? Can they be sued?
All right, this is going to be my longest answer, so take it in. So look, really the situation really comes down to this. The government have mandated some industries. As we all know, the border workers, it's mandated that they are required to, let me kill that noise for a starter. We just kill it completely. Those people are required to have a no vax, no job requirement. That's the law. So there's no getting out of that one. So anyone who's on the border, now it's being expanded further, so into the education sector and I believe into the health sector. And a lot of people will probably lose their jobs because they're very adamant that they're not going to be in a situation where they're going to be forced to vaccinate. But unfortunately, that's where it goes. Now, to answer the question, what does the law, can employers, I think the question was, what employers are required to have that? Now, it all comes back down to there's been an Employment Relations Authority decision already. Now, it was on one of those border workers, it was customs, but the worker was not a frontline worker. Now, the other interesting point was that particular role, the Employment Relations Authority emphasized it wasn't because of the government order. What it was done, their justification for it was for health and safety. So the Health and Safety Employment Act was what they relied on. And to me, that says to every employer out there, you've got responsibility to keep your people safe under that Employment Relations Act. So I'm going to be giving advice on the way through. So employers right now, and many are doing it already, are adopting a no vax, no job, particularly for some roles. Now, there's three things I want to do. So, Shelley, I'll just label one more before we get into more questions. So there's three things that we really need to focus on here. And they are the fact that, first off, what employers need to do is to have a policy in regards to no vax, no job. So you need a vaccination policy. That is really important, and we can guide you through it. And as this session goes, things will unfold for you, and you'll know how to do a policy. The next thing is that you need to do a safety assessment of each role. So to see whether that role could function if that person was not vaccinated. There are particular functions that can exist. For example, someone who works at home. Very simple. They don't need to be vaccinated. But there are some roles, maybe it's a desk role. You know, we are all accountants on this show today, so that means everybody could work from potentially 2 meters away from someone else. Wear a mask, have staggered meal breaks, those sort of things happening. So do a safety assessment of each role and write it up, folks, because it's really important that you do that. Now, the third mandatory thing you need to do, all employers need to do, is to consult. That is, talk to your people. Have a record you've talked to your people. I particularly want to see a record because that will be good evidence in time to come that you've conducted, or you or your clients have conducted themselves in a fair way. Let's run through those again. Policy. Next thing, safety assessment of the role. And the third and final thing is consult. That is discussions with your employees. Take them through the journey on developing a policy as well. So my quick answer to that is, Shelley, is if you're in a business where you interface with people, your job is to keep those people safe. If the employer believes that unvaccinated people are a risk, and already the Employment Relations Authority have decided that, and that's your guidance, then you should ensure that everybody's safe in the workplace by, there's two things under the Health and Safety Employment Act, is to minimise the risk, and as I say, office workers could probably be fine, or the other one is to eliminate it, and that is saying, sorry, you can't function in your role when you're unvaccinated. We'll go out of our way to try and find you other roles. If we can't find you another role, we may have to say goodbye. Now, that would be very unfortunate, particularly now when staff are extremely hard to find.
So that probably leads us into the next question, Max, because the next one I had was, can a business legally apply this rule if it's not one of those industries that the government has mandated that they must have vaccines? And so can the business in an industry that's not been mandated be sued? And I guess you're saying that yes, they can under the Health and Safety Act.
Yes, I'm saying that, but the other thing is that perhaps, what I'm looking at, it goes a step further. Not only can an employer do it, they can choose to do it. I'm thinking also that WorkSafe will insist that they do it. So the failure, if any employer had an outbreak in their workplace right now, could they be sued by WorkSafe for failing to have all the necessary actions in place to ensure that the place is safe? And by not having a policy, not assessing each role, they could be sued. Now, I'm thinking WorkSafe right now, while the nation is not fully vaccinated, well, reasonably fully vaccinated, I'm thinking they're probably apprehensive to take an action right now. But stand by, folks, because our legislation, our health and safety at work laws, are developed from the Australian law. And in New South Wales, the Deputy Premier, wait for this is landmark stuff, notified all employees, if you serve any customers in your business that are unvaccinated, we will sue you. So what I'm saying is it's likely that we'll soon see this government's got it in them to mandate that requirement and put it onto employers to be the bad guys, not the government themselves, and say to the employers, if you don't have a safety policy in place regarding vaccines, then you'll be sued for lack of the requirements under the Health and Safety at Work Act.
You mentioned there, Max, just going off the questions here, you mentioned that if you serve a customer, is the employer having to be concerned with whether the customer's vaccinated as well? Absolutely.
So the employer or the business owner is in charge of the whole workplace. So whoever you let into your business or let out of the business, that is a requirement that's under your control. And what the Act's saying is if you're in control of the workplace as you are, then you've got the responsibilities to keep everybody safe, including the staff, including visitors like customers, including your suppliers. So now, to demonstrate how far this government will go, not many employers are aware of this, but there's been a law passed very, very quietly that you're probably not aware of, and that is the scanning in, the QR codes. Now, I just can't believe that no of the media haven't even told your employers out there, but this legislation, if you want copies of it, come back to me. But if you fail to, if you let somebody into your workplace who hasn't scanned or signed in, then you're up for it. Wait for this. That business owner could be up for 6 months jail or a $4,000 fine, and no one's told you. Now that, to me, is amazing, but that shows you what lengths this government will go to mandate the requirements of putting it back onto employers every time that they're going to be the bad guys here.
Crikey. Okay.
It's almost impossible, Shelley, for like a little, across the road from me is a little cafe. They can't stand at the door and monitor that, but no. It seems grossly unfair. But do you know what's even worse? No one knows about this law.
No, I wonder when they're going to take the time to tell us. All right, we've got quite a few questions. Let's keep on moving. How can businesses work around requiring employees to be vaccinated? I guess you touched on that by if you can socially distance within the office and separate the meal breaks, separate the desks, wear masks, you could work around that requirement.
Well, the facts of this, employers do not have the right to force people to get a vaccination. What you do have a right to do is to say that the job's not here for you if you're not vaccinated. Now, does that make sense? So this government, our smiling government says to everybody, hey, it's your choice whether you're vaccinated or not. We're not forcing you, but we'll make sure the employers don't employ you and you're not allowed in anywhere unless you are vaccinated. So it is the people's freedom of choice not to be vaccinated. So don't put pressure on them as an employer. But what you've got to say to them is saying, unfortunately, if that's your choice, this role may not be available for you. Now, remembering also, if you've got a business where people can work from home, then you don't actually have to worry about this too much. But ensure you've got the preventions in place to make sure those people are safe within their own environments and make sure they're not interfacing with you when they come into the workplace, if they ever come in at all. And because I've got people that work for me, I see very rarely, physically see them, but we're talking all the time. But that's fine. But what I'm saying again, the requirement for my people is not to be vaccinated if they don't want to be. I'm lucky. So there are situations where employers can get around the policy thing, but I think they should have a policy. I think they should still do it, put it aside, put it in the bottom drawer, and it's there in case someone takes a swing at you.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Max. Moving to the next question, can non-vaccinated employees be treated differently from a vaccinated employee within the workplace?
Can they? The quick answer to that is yes. I mean, a lot of people are concerned about the discrimination laws, and I'll explain that through as well. But if you look at the safety laws, it's not only yes, they can discriminate, but you should, because you've got to ensure that people are safe. So the people that might present a risk in your workplace, like the individual that is refusing to vaccinate and is in the office environment while there's a warehouse at the back or something like that, well, then you've got to say to that employee, unfortunately, you will not be allowed to go out and interface with people. Unfortunately, you can't have your morning tea with those individuals because we deem you to be a risk for them. So, unfortunately, that's our rulings for you. Right. You can go to the tea room when they're not there, but make sure you wash your hands, keep a distance, and wash down, clean the surfaces after you finish. It's awful, but yes, you've got that obligation. Now, Shelley, that touches on the Human Rights Act and the discrimination laws. So there has been a lot on social media, and everybody, I'm sure you're sitting there rolling your eyes around, because if you're not on social media seeing this stuff, it's just massive. Everyone's suddenly a big high-powered lawyer and knows everything. Now, in the Bill of Rights, I'll talk about that as well, but the Human Rights Act has got an exemption in there. So if you're discriminating on people on the basis of them, so someone could claim they've got a disability and cannot get vaccinated, and that's highly probable or possible. If that's the case, can you discriminate against them? The answer is yes. And Section 29 of the Human Rights Act enables that to happen, where in fact it says there is such a person could perform those duties. I don't know, where is it? Including a risk of infecting others or an illness. So that's the exemption. So if a person presents into the workplace a risk that could be infecting others with giving them an illness or a safety issue, but this is in fact infecting them, then you have a right to have an exemption through that act. And by the way, while we're there, the Bill of Rights, I didn't know there's self-righteous people out there saying, the Bill of Rights overwrites all this, you guys just talk for a hole in your head and just forget about it because it doesn't write. Section 4 of the Bill of Rights is explicit. It says if the Bill of Rights is in conflict with any other legislation, then that other piece of legislation will override the Bill of Rights. And look, if you want to, I can provide you with that. I've even got it written down here, but look, I won't bore you with all that, but that is available for those skeptics out there that really do think that that's not a possibility out there. And of course, the Privacy Act is another one people go on about. You can't ask for vaccination information from someone. It's a breach of privacy. inside the Privacy Act also, there is an exemption in there, and that's Section 24. And also right at the beginning, in the information in Principle 10, there are exemptions in there that enable you, when it comes to health and safety, folks, that is a paramount clause, and the Privacy Act is anticipated situations like this and saying, no, that health and safety shall come first before the rights of privacy here.
Okay, so that means we are legally able to ask our employees their vaccination status.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you should do that, by the way. Just if you're in a vulnerable situation, their roles are a vulnerable situation. For that situation, I'm saying people working from home and those sort of things you probably don't need to know, but you need to know the rules. If they are not vaccinated, tell them, hey, if you're coming in, please keep 2 meters distance, your mask, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Okay. Fabulous. What rights do employees have against their employer who's adopted this policy of no vaccine, no job?
Well, an employee could challenge it. So, for example, if you're working from home and then the boss says to you, sorry, if you haven't got a jab, then you don't get, your job's gone. Of course, that's unreasonable and unjust. So you could challenge that by way of a personal grievance and take the employer to task. Now, I'm anticipating, because of the multiple of thousands, Brian Tamaki found like 2,000 even yesterday, but the thousands of people, or Saturday, thousands of people out there that are anti-vax, it's possible we're going to get some personal grievances out of that. But if you follow what I'm giving you today, the guidance you give you today, you're on firm ground, solid ground. All employers will be, to ensure their way through that. So remember the first thing, policy. Second one, safety assessment. Third one is make sure that you're talking to people all the way through. If you're doing all those things thoroughly, and you can get guidance from myself and Shelley, or whatever you need to do in actually setting those up, if you do them properly, you're going to be fine. And that's every other employer out there. Talking to accountants, you guys are the place where all small businesses go to. So they'll be looking at you for advice. I'll send you out after this, or through Shelley. Shelley will send it to you, a brief note on, it's 5 pages, in fact, on what I'm saying today. So you can have that at hand, and you can pass it on to your clientele and say to them, well, this is what the advice we've got, and this is where it sits at the moment.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it will fuel the fire for the anti-vaxxers, because they just can't see any reason why people have a right to have this kind of policy. But it will help you, to guide you through that, and to sit there quietly and saying, you're entitled to your opinion. Thank you, but be aware this is the way we see things.
Great, fabulous. Oh, that's excellent. Thanks very much, Max. We'll get that out to the members. So we may have covered this, but next question, practically, what do you do if an employee refuses? I think you've probably touched on that in terms of, well, if they can work from home, they work from home, or otherwise their job.
Well, it's important, Shelley. I think I haven't worked through this. So you've got an individual whose role one is a safety sensitive role. So you've just done a safety assessment, and you deem it, you being the employer, you deem it to be unsafe, and you notify the person. Unfortunately, if you're not vaccinated, you're not able to do that. Well, I'm coming to work anyway, boss. So tough luck. You do your worst. That's awful, and it's going to happen, by the way, and it is awful, particularly if it's someone you value a lot. The idea is to have a long talk to them, say, look, can we look for another role for you in the workplace? Can we give you other duties? If you get an obstinate person just not prepared to engage with you reasonably, well, then you're going to have to go through it and say, well, look, unfortunately, we're going to have to go through a disciplinary process. This is our ruling. So a policy, folks, is like a rules from the workplace. And you've got to say, you're now in violation of that rule. If you come to work, you're putting people at risk, and you're putting my business at risk of being sued. So I'm going to have to, unfortunately, go through a disciplinary process with you. And you're getting clear notification if you breach this by turning up for work in an unsafe situation. Then we'll have to issue you with a warning, and that you could be dismissed if you violate that situation again. And if they do turn up for work, you would say to them, stand you down on pay, go home, and come back tomorrow when things cool off, and then we'll have or get on a Zoom with me. It might be safer to do that, and we'll have a talk, and you bring a representative with you, but we're going to ask for your explanation why you have breached our policy. And if you don't give us one satisfactory, you're going to be dismissed. Now, that's the shortened version, but certainly get some guidance through that, folks, because it's likely a personal grievance will come out of this. So you want to make sure your steps are done properly through that.
Okay, thanks. I think that's clear. So I'm just going to take a question that's come through the chat box. So if after consultations with employee and a health and safety assessment of the workplace, the policy states that some people can remain unvaccinated if they have a medical reason, would that place the business at risk with health and safety law if they still have people on premises that aren't vaccinated because of their medical condition?
Yes, and I get asked this all the time. And so the answer to this is that an unvaccinated, a person who's unvaccinated for justifiable reasons like their health status, and I've got somebody pretty close to me, her husband is nearly died and at a very young age, and he had 6 months in hospital for a reaction to a vaccine. So he's been advised by his doctors, do not have the Pfizer vaccination. So as your responsibilities are employers to keep everybody safe in the workplace. So unfortunately, that individual, you'll have to exclude them from that role. If you haven't got other roles that they could fulfill, you're going to have to keep them out of the workplace because they are presenting a risk to others. Now, even the government haven't come up to this standard yet. They haven't made their decision on this, but that's the way the Health and Safety at Work Act works, and that's what you would be, would think, open to being sued by WorkSafe if, in fact, you let a person in there. Now, just think about this for a while. If you had an outbreak in your workplace and you had that individual in the workplace, then you haven't taken all practical steps to keep everybody safe. You've allowed that person in the workplace. So to me, it's a no-brainer. You really do have to exclude them from having interactions and interfacing with individuals. So it's a very sad situation for that individual. Look, Shelley, this is going to be one of the most difficult time for employers because right now they can't get replacement staff. They're desperate, and now they're going to be faced with this. And what I can't work out is why the Employers Association and EMA and a few of those people are pushing for the government to mandate it ASAP, because I would think they're likely that many businesses will be unable to function without those key people who are going to refuse vaccination.
Yeah. Wow, it's going to be a nightmare. Okay. Following that vein, how much time do I need to allow my employee to get vaccinated before I can legally dismiss them?
And the answer in my world is the most frustrating one all the time. So don't forgive me, but that is give them a reasonable time. Now, so I think in terms of what is a reasonable time in these situations, do a bit of research. If you know that there's a vaccination centre nearby, and there's no multiple thousands of cars waiting at the front, most of them are just open now. And of course, they can go to their doctor. Chemists are doing it. All sorts of people are now. So I think a reasonable period of time could be you've got the next few days to get vaccinated. And if you're not, then we're going to have to reassess our position in relation to our employment. And we'd like to meet with you on Zoom or somewhere and talk about what we can do to try and accommodate your stance on that. It's your freedom of choice, but unfortunately we can't let you work in your role as it goes.
Great. Okay. Next question, is asking a job candidate about their vaccination status a breach of privacy?
Yep, good question again. And again, it's the Privacy Act. So, in fact, I would say it's your obligation to. If you've got a safety-sensitive workplace where you're interfacing with public or your own staff, you physically got to touch those sort of things, then it's reasonable you ask a new candidate. So, again, you have a right to do that. Can you discriminate on somebody will be a question on offering them a job if they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. The answer is yes, you've got to. In fact, you can put it into your terms of work for that individual. You're working as across the counter with the public. We want you to be vaccinated. And a lot of employers right now and businesses are actually putting up as part of their advertising, all our staff are fully vaccinated. I've got hairdressers doing that right now. and those sort of things, giving people the assurance and comfort that they can actually go there knowing that vaccinated staff are actually looking after them. So that it's reasonable for an employer to have those requirements. It's the same as wearing a uniform. You employers can insist on wearing a uniform and keeping a reasonable standard of dress. This is the same. So you can make it a condition of employment. And now that's going a long way further, and put it in the employment agreement.
Okay. I think that's clear. There was a question here, but we've addressed it. The question was, employers have a responsibility to ensure a safe workplace for their employees. How does this relate to the COVID vaccines? So I think you've covered that in terms of, yes, health and safety, it's forefront of what employers need to do.
Well, the Health and Safety Employment at Work Act, Management of Risk, Section 30, says, the meaning of reasonable and practical. So that's the things. They've got to take all reasonable steps if there is a potential risk in the workplace. And that says that the likelihood of a hazard or a risk concerning occurring. So what I'm saying there is, what this act is saying there, that you've got an obligation, and the test is what a person knows and ought to reasonably know. So if you're the owner of the business out there and you know that COVID potentially could be a risk, and you haven't investigated that thoroughly, and you know that COVID or unvaccinated people could be a potential risk, and you haven't got it, you're going to be in the gun by WorkSafe. So I'm saying to you, at the moment, I don't think WorkSafe, I'm guessing here, and it's a dangerous situation, but I don't think WorkSafe are going to act on this for a little while, but I'm thinking in another week or so, the government's going to be pushing. And remember, WorkSafe is a government department. The government would prefer employers to be the bad guys here, and they can keep smiling and saying, it's up to you whether you get vaccinated or not, and smile a lot. But the facts are they're going to probably mandate this very quickly.
Okay, watch this space. We're certainly seeing things are changing on a daily basis, aren't they? Next question there. Do you manage COVID sick leave any different than standard sick leave?
The answer to that is no. Sick leave, if a person's sick, then you treat them as a sick person. If a person's got COVID, then they are sick, then you obviously provide them with the sick pay that's available for them. And when that expires, they finished, exhausted all the sick leave, then it's obviously leave without pay. So no, there's no change to that at all. Now, in terms of time off to go and get vaccinated or perhaps even get tested, I would advise employers there to be reasonable and to assist as much as they can, provide time off. Reasonable, again, it's that terrible word, reasonable, and give them that leeway for as I say, a few times, and then allow them to have it. But don't let an employee abuse it, and some of them may try.
They do. Next one, would it be required, the vaccine, that is, for businesses that don't have face-to-face contact with customers? And I'm thinking, from what I've learned from you this morning, is the answer is probably yes, because they're going to be connecting with other employees within the workplace. So it's not a customer issue, it's your workmate issue.
Oh, good, Shelley. You're getting top of the class. There we are.
Good. Brownie points.
Anyone who's physically in contact with another person at this particular time, then yes, you've got to take all reasonable precautions to keep everybody safe in the workplace. Just remember the safety of everybody. I mean, that's the suppliers, that's the customers, that's the employees. Everybody is the business owner's responsibility. And with that goes the requirement to unvaccinated people a risk, and already the Employment Relations Authority have judged them to be a risk. So, folks, I think your obligations are loud and clear here, but enforcement is the question. May not happen right now, but it's certainly about to be. I think we're going to have a test case very, very soon, and I hope we do. But pity that employer. May it not be anybody watching this show right now.
Indeed. So that, I'm just going to throw another question in there that I've thought, so if it's not just customers coming on board into your workplace you have to be concerned with, it's also suppliers or anybody coming in to change your light bulbs or deliver your fruit box. You're going to need to be asking that question of them or requiring them not to come through your doors if they're not vaccinated.
Correct. I mean, you may allow them to if they're changing a light bulb, and you might say, when are you coming? And when you come in, please keep 2 meters distance, wear a mask. Then we'll vacate that room for you, and you can have full rights to it. Can you please make sure you wipe down all services before you leave and notify us that you'd left, and leave the door open while you're in there so it's ventilating. Those precautions, you could do it, but again, you need to have that policy. And I'm saying that employers could, if you've got one written, just hand it off to everybody before they come in. So that's your suppliers or anybody before they come in. But what a pain it is for a customer. Now, I'm anticipating here that we're going to see a lot of civil disobedience, and perhaps by a lot of small employers. One, they can't afford to do this. They can't afford to lose employees, and they're at risk. And that's really, their business may even shut down if they go to enforce this. So it's going to be extremely hard on them, and they're going to probably take risks. And as I say, I just hope that none of them are associated with anybody who's watching this today. But they're taking a big risk. But you can almost feel it for them, because it means no income or some income. And it's not going to be an easy journey, particularly critical people in their workplace.
Just another concern for employers to battle with. So is it likely that the government's going to pass legislation to make it clear for employers what their rights are in terms of needing to enforce the vaccine and just what we're talking about? Is there going to be legislation to back up the employer's position?
Well, those leading advocates for business are actually screaming and yelling for it now. Please do it quickly. And thinking, my goodness, you're going to do our population and businesses are going to create a lot of problems if it's mandated. Now, and not only that, we're seeing prominent people for our society also saying, please mandate it, government. And I'm hoping the government's apprehension to do it is on the basis that, because we've only got, I think it's full population, we've only got 60% of our population vaccinated now. Maybe it's a bit more, 65 now. So that means 35% of our population is unvaccinated. That means 35% of all employees would have to be dismissed. And I'm thinking that will bring to a grinding halt the functions of government even, if they brought that as a mandate. Is it likely to happen? I think, look at the scanning process. I mean, the government didn't hesitate, put that into place very, very quietly and quickly. And the media don't even see it as important. But look at it. It's 6 months jail for an employer who lets someone into their business who hasn't scanned. I think they're likely to do it. And my guess was after this weekend's, what do we call it, Super Saturday, I think that was a last-ditched effort to get a lot of people vaccinated. And I'm not as happy as the government and the media were in terms of the outcomes. I think we're going to see in the next week or so, this is going to become mandatory. So stand by. And that means, guys, the advice I'm providing today could change within the next week or so. So I'll put that out, and there's a rider at the bottom of my written advice to you. Just watch this space. It could change very quickly. And look, if Shelley wants me to, I'd happy just amend the written material and send it back out to you again, or hold another one of these sessions.
Yeah, it's certainly a moving feast at the moment. Just an observation on what you mentioned there about the scanning in, how it's a now legal requirement that somebody coming on premises must scan in. It's very easy for somebody to hold their phone up. Nobody knows whether they're actually pushing the right buttons to scan or not. Just go through the motion.
It is, and that piece of legislation, which is it's only small, and but it also says there's a $400 fine for those individuals who, have bypassed it. There's so many laws being passed in New Zealand, and I'm not very happy with this. There's a lot of laws passed in New Zealand that are not being utilised by anybody, but the government will penalise if a problem does occur, an outbreak happens in a workplace. They will use those laws to penalise that employer to cause as much pain as possible, 6 months jail or whatever it might be. So it's a little unfair, I think, particularly because there's so many laws out there now, and this is just compounding it. We're getting more and more and more of them. So it's not an easy journey right now for employers or any business owner.
No, it's not. I'm going to take another question from the chat there, and it's along the lines of one that we had in our list prepared. What are our rights when using independent contractors in our place of work?
So a lot of my clientele are contacting me now, and they rely, for example, small employers that might work on a construction site. So they're telling me that the principal owner of the construction site might be Fletcher's or anyone like that. And please, it's not Fletcher's, but if they do, they've got a policy saying no one's allowed on site unless they're vaccinated. And these small employers are going, hey, my key people are not vaccinated and don't want to be vaccinated. What am I going to do? And again, that principal is entitled to have that policy, and you've got to respect it. You can challenge it lawfully, legally if you want to, but I would think that it's going to be upheld if it's within reason. And a construction site, people do interact and have to physically, they lift things together. And there could be precautions in place about 2 metre distancing and those sort of factors, but you've got to have to respect that. And your rights as an individual, you're going to have to abide by whatever the principal wants. Otherwise, they have the right to remove you from that property, even have a trespass order put on you.
Okay, so really, it's no different whether you're dealing with a subcontractor or an employee. You've still got the health and safety first and foremost.
Yeah.
Another question's just popped in the box there. What is the piece of legislation with that mandatory scanning you were telling us about that popped in?
I'm just wondering if I've got it right here, but it's if you go onto the legislation site, it's under the word Covert, so it's a special piece of legislation. No, I don't actually have it here.
We can come back to the user on that one.
I can actually send it and put it with the doc. I can add it to the bottom of that documentation. So if you go and just, it is a search engine, there's a search provision within the legislation website, and then just put the word Covert, and you'll see 3 or 4 of them come up.
Okay.
And you need to go through them to find which one it is. But it's only a short piece of legislation, and you'll see it there.
And did EMA or MB notify small businesses of this piece of legislation that was put through?
I don't think they did.
Helpful.
Unhelpful, yeah. But it's important. But and the media, I put a press release out to them, and they didn't think it was important enough to release. So that was their decision. But every employer I'm talking to goes, "What?
Yeah,
really?"
Just goes to show. Yeah. Okay. Information overload on what we already know, and not the important stuff of what's changing. Okay. We're probably down to about the last 6 questions or so. How does this policy of no vax, no job, how does that fit with current law, which says an employee doesn't have to supply medical information or discrimination for the same? So I think you might have touched on that by saying that the Health and Safety Act actually overrides the Privacy Act, doesn't it?
Yep, and the Privacy Act's got provision in there saying if anyone presents a risk of infecting the rest of the workplace, particularly on the discrimination of disability, then that will override it. So also, look, you have a right to go. Employers have a right anytime if they're suspicious that their employees may have an illness that's going to cause difficulties for other people. Difficulties, I mean, are a hazard to other employees or a risk to them. Section 68 of the Holidays Act talks about proof of sickness and injury. Section 68(4), and it reads here, to avoid doubt, this section does not prevent an employer who's authorized illegally from requiring an employee to establish that there are no relevant health and safety reasons or hygiene reasons that would prevent the employee from working. So you've got a right here, and again, it puts an obligation on employers to ask your employees about the vaccination. So that's the Holidays Act, and under the sickness requirement, you can ask the employee to provide that information. In fact, I would go further. If you've got a safety-sensitive role and the employee is not prepared to provide that information, I would say, go home. I'm activating this rights under this section. I want to have that proof that there's nothing to hold you up coming from work. If you can't provide that, we're going to assume that you're not vaccinated and you present a risk to the workplace. You're not to attend work. Now, the other thing is, you're quite correct. Employers don't have a right to know about people's specific illnesses. There might be privacy reasons why you don't want people to know exactly what private things, personal things. it could be sexual diseases or whatever. You don't actually have to tell them the reasons. But what an employer does have a right to, and this is saying it in here, proof of sickness, if it interferes with work or presents a risk to the workplace, then the employer does have a right. And they have a right also to know if it's going to interfere in work, you're going to get sick later on, those sort of things. They have a right to know that, but they don't have a right to know what the details are.
Okay. Moving to our next question. Again, we might have touched on this, but just to round it out, what about clients coming on the premises? Are we legally allowed to ask clients of their vaccination status?
And the answer to that is yes, and I think I advise you to do that. I think you need a policy which you can present to everybody, and maybe even have a reduced section of the policy that may be in your foyer or in your reception or whatever it might be. But before they enter, you might say the policy of this place is that you need to be vaccinated because we need to interact with you closely. Or the policy might be you need to be masked and 2 metre distance from individuals at all times, and not to touch anybody at all. So those are the requirements I think that you could introduce quite reasonably. But not only could, you probably have a responsibility to if you're the employer.
Right. Okay. Just an aside, we've actually had a client approach us wanting to know our team what our vaccination policy is for our work, because they've got a view on who they do and don't want to work with in terms of their suppliers. So they're looking at it across their suppliers and going, what's everybody's vaccination policy, and I'm going to choose who I work for,
Yeah.
So just as much as we're looking at for our business, the members should be aware that they might, well, if not already, they may well be getting clients coming to them saying, I want to know what your vaccination policy is. I only want to deal with you if you're all fully vaccinated. So it's going to come
and stand by for that, because, all you people should be doing the same. You should be saying to all your suppliers and those people you interact with, can you let me know your policy in regards to this? And also that it's going to go across the board. We're going to receive it everywhere. In the next probably 6 months or so, while COVID is, before we become immune to COVID, I think that we're going to see a lot more of this. So, stand by for it, folks, and don't be frightened to be first off the ranks, because you're doing what you're lawfully supposed to do.
Okay, fabulous. Another question on our list, liability. What if a business, which is in one of those mandated industries, doesn't want to adopt the rule? Do they have a choice? No.
Well, no, you could, if you've got a supplier, for example, who's not prepared to, and someone that comes onto your workplace not prepared to adopt the precautions that you want, then you've got to stop doing business with them. And that's, again, that could cripple a business. I've got a situation where one of my clients is saying that their supplier has got a policy and their key staff are refusing to vax, and it means their business could potentially shut down. And that's really, really tough. And that's where I just can't believe that the business associations are now screaming and yelling at the government to hurry up and mandate it, because they're going to cause a lot of pain and problems for small employers who are going to be forced to breach the law, or if they want to survive. If not, they're just going to have to shut the doors and walk away from their businesses. And wow, that's going to be hard, really hard.
So the early childhood and teaching is one of the mandated industries, isn't it? So if one of those businesses didn't want to follow that policy, they've really got to close up shop, don't they? They don't have an option.
And I know of one right now who's going to have to shut up shop. Their staff are just refusing and saying blatantly, no, I'm not going to get it. So boss, you decide what you want to do. And look, it's just heartbreaking, because it's not only the business which will suffer, and a lot of people don't have empathy for employers and go, look, you guys are rich pricks and all that sort of stuff. But what will happen there, those children have got nowhere to go, and they've got to find another centre to go to. And they've got to get bedded in there with new people. It's hard on mums and dads. It's hard on everybody. And it's going to be particularly government mandated, as they have in that particular section. It's going to cause a lot of pain,
Okay. It will indeed. Another question that's come through the chat box, following on from our earlier question about employees that perhaps can't get vaccinated due to a medical reason. So is the only way to get away with those obligations under the current health and safety law regarding unvaccinated people because of a medical condition, is that going to have to be in future legislation that they are exempted? Is that likely what the government might do, to say for those with a medical condition, genuine, that you can't have the vaccine, that your employer won't be in breach of the health and safety, or just you don't see that on the horizon?
I would think that would be the only time that I could see logically you could allow somebody unvaccinated, presents a risk to the workplace, and to allow them to maintain their job. I'm a little, logic says no, they are a risk to the workplace and they shouldn't be allowed in the workplace. To me, if you've got a safety-sensitive role for that individual. But if the government says you've got to go and let them in there, wow, I'd be shocked and amazed, and the government is refusing to answer the question right now. So, and the reason we know that is because when they were saying, the passport that's going to come into being, and by the way, folks, think about what's the purpose of the passport, and that is to mandate the requirement of vaccination. That's our sole purpose. So the government's on track to do this. But what now that they're looking, and the question's been asked to the government, are you going to give exemptions to those people who got a sickness and can't take a vaccination? And they won't answer the question. Hipkins won't. Those people are, and because they don't want to be the bad guys. They much prefer employers to be the bad guys.
Yeah, right.
And that's unfortunate. And I would say that we're not going to see exemptions come through, but there's a possibility this government does some strange things when it comes to logic.
Okay.
They're very compassionate and considerate and being kind to people. But...
and then we'll drop something on you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question there, if under the current Health and Safety Act, employers have that obligation, then why is WorkSafe not investigating businesses that have had outbreaks where the COVID has spread through their workplace? Or are they being investigated and it's just not hitting the media?
No, WorkSafe are... they develop law amongst themselves. So the legislation is there, and I don't understand why WorkSafe doesn't enforce it quite often. So that's why I'm predicting WorkSafe are reluctant now to make any enforcements, because a large proportion of New Zealanders are not vaccinated properly. They're not doing their job, and thank goodness they're not, because a lot of employers would be dragged through the courts right now. And I anticipate that they will show leniency for a little bit longer, while New Zealand's predominantly, not predominantly, a large proportion of New Zealanders are unvaccinated. But as soon as we get up to a certain level, I think you're going to see a prosecution occur. Right. And as I said before, let it not be you.
Yeah, it'll all start happening then. Our last three items on the list, and there's another one in the chat box I'll come to in a minute. How compulsory are screens in the reception areas or masks on reception desks for firms like ours, accounting firms that would only have a few visitors a day?
Well, again, you've got to keep everybody safe. So if you've got an unvaccinated person wandering through and giving everybody a hug and perhaps a kiss on the cheek, you've got a high possibility of infecting the rest of the workplace. So you need to manage that as the workplace controller. And with that, you could be liable for allowing that to happen. So at the reception area, you need to say, please respect our requirement to wear a mask and to be 2 meters apart. And please refrain from physical touching unless, I wouldn't even put unless at all, I think, if you can refrain from it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think
no matter what sort of relationship you've got may have with the individual, yes.
Okay. Now, another question we've got here, perhaps it's going to be in your document that you send around, but best practice in working with staff employment issues in a COVID environment.
Well, that's pretty wide. So, again, I'll just say it again. In the COVID environment, the three things you need to do is to have a policy, and that's a vaccination policy. The next thing you need to do is to do a work assessment to identify the safety-sensitive roles within the workplace. So, safety-sensitive roles is the key word I see more and more. Yep. And the third thing is consult. Now, the question is, Max, why do you say all these things and where do you get your mandate to say these things? It's based primarily, most of the advice I'm giving today is based on that decision by the Employment Relations Authority. They congratulated that employer for having a thorough workplace assessment. And that tells us all that if you do a thorough assessment of the workplace and assess each role individually, as my partner just said to me, we've got like 300 people. You're going to do a safety assessment on those, but you can collectively. Some roles don't interact with people, so you can say office workers in Section 5, they're fine provided they have masks and so on and so forth. You can do that sort of in cohorts or bucket loads, if you like, and have a policy that suits all of those people without actually going to each divisional role. But if there are, like sales reps, they can interface or don't interface, and you need to make judgment on those. And that's what this policy is about, you making judgment and setting the rules.
Okay, thanks. From the chat box, we have probably the last question in there. So we've got about 6 minutes to go, everyone. If there was a burning question that you have that we haven't yet covered, can you please submit it now? So the question we've got, if an unvaccinated employee wants to work from home, then can we eventually work towards termination, as they will never be able to attend team training, meetings, events, and therefore can't complete the job fully to what the employer requires?
And that's a good question, because it really puts a good example up. So there's an employer saying, look, you're unvaccinated, please work from home. We can give you some duties. But what they should be saying to that individual, and again, it comes to the consult, we can't indefinitely provide this for you. We're hoping that we change in laws, or perhaps there'll be some other reasons we don't. But we're going to reassess the situation on, the 1st of November or whatever it might be. So keep informing that staff member. I think like this employer or a potential employer, that's been brought up, is probably acting in a very reasonable manner with that staff member, but make sure there's no surprises afoot. Because if in future they can't hold that job indefinitely for them working from home, and I've got an employer now, a key employee is working from home, very senior employee, senior manager, but they're saying we can't do this forever. So the thing is then to notify that person, this can't be held forever. So we're going to be reviewing it on a regular basis with you. And that's, again, work with them, consult, talk, and document. Please document, because then you've got that and put on the file, because then you can show that you've been acting in a fair and reasonable manner in case this person takes a personal grievance. Brace yourself, folks, because their personal grievances will possibly pop up in the next few weeks. I'm going to see people very upset because the anti-vaxxers are pretty self-righteous at the moment. And look, maybe some of them have got good reason, but let's not get into that debate. Employers, you are required by law to be decisive and protect people. So just remembering your overriding obligations, irrespective of other views.
Fabulous. And one final question before we wrap this up, Max. What are your thoughts on employers temperature checking employees when they arrive in the office?
Well, I think it's reasonable. I mean, you may even have a policy that says that if they're unvaccinated, that we want you to be checked on a weekly basis, to get a covert check on a weekly basis. Temperature checks as they come in the door, why not? I mean, it's not, it's just pointing something at their brow. It's not intrusive. I think there's probably a good, just a trigger mechanism to say, wow, you've got a temperature right now. Can you please explain why? Did you jog to work or something? And then go through and work on it. But it's good. You've got to take all reasonable precautions to keep people safe. And that's showing that you're a diligent, good employer and you're trying to keep everybody safe in the workplace.
Right.
But
so there'd be no legal issues with doing that under the health and safety. If you believe that you need to check people's temperature each day to keep the office safe, then there should be no issues that the employee...
No issues at all. No, and I belonging, it's done consistently across the board.
Yeah.
You're not just picking people because you don't like them, or trust them. So just put it across the board. And look, you'll find most people are reasonable. I mean, we've been going through airports and we've been monitored, and you go to the doctors and the first thing they do to you is measure your temperature. That's
right. Yeah. It's part of our daily routine now. Excellent. Well, Max, I want to thank you very much. It's been really informative. Just so many questions and issues here, and I can see it's just going to be a minefield that we're going to be operating in the next 6 to 12 months, and it's just another challenge for all the employers out there. And thank you for offering to give us a document with some pointers from you. I'm sure that'll be really well received. And on that, we'll have your contact details. So if the members have any burning questions they need, they can contact you to direct. Of course, your website is available for all to find at the Whitehead Group. Yeah, it's been fantastic. Well, thanks again, Max. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shelley, and thank you everybody for hanging around for the full hour. So thanks a lot.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.